All right. All right. So anyways, thank you again for coming. Welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and start our collector for this week. It's probably not a name you've seen or a label you've come across. This is one example, and the reason for that is you can see it's handwritten, also in Russian. So a lot of times we don't tend to send these labels to volunteers because they're obviously quite tricky to read. When our students come across them, I usually just tell them, pull off the data you can get and mark it as Russian and just kind of put it in the queue, and we'll get to them when we find someone who can help us read them. In this case, scientific name we can read, we can see the date, 1932, it's August 25th. But this particular label is actually one that a student came up to me last week asking me if I could help them figure out the collector's name. And so in this case, you can see it here. We've got our LEG collector and determiner is this name here. And they thought it could be maybe L. Lavier or L. Savier or even Javier, and really weren't sure. And so what I did was I was like, well, let's take a look. It was not one that was familiar to me. Let's take a look at other specimens from Tennessee, kind of around the same time, to see, has it been transcribed by somebody else? What did they put down? And it was not helpful because other people in the past had put all of these options. They had been their best guesses, and no one was really sure what it was. So we instead cast kind of a wider net. And that's one of the superpowers of the portal is you can look at other people's collections and say, what did they have any specimens similar with a name that was transcribed that maybe makes sense? And we had kind of hit a lucky note there in finding a specimen like this, which is from our Miami University, actually in Ohio, which is one of our partners on Global. And this was a label that they had digitized, and we can see from the name L.I. Savicz, which was similar. So if you look at comparing this to our label, once I saw that, I was like, well, it could be L-A-V-I. This could be a C. It looks like an E-R, but it could be a C, just kind of a sloppy C. This could be a Z. I wasn't really sure, but then I looked at another one of our labels, seemingly from the same collector, and this one had kind of a clear line through the last letter. So that looked a lot more like a Z to me. And this again, could be a C. We looked again a little bit further. We found some more records from an L.I. Savicz-Lubitzkaya. You could see we have a number of records from a Russian herbarium, which also have L. Savicz hyphenated last name. And that's kind of where we felt pretty confident. This one even has one collected on the exact same day. So August 25th, 1932 in Russia. So we felt pretty confident that that's probably our collector, which was pretty exciting. So it was, again, a new name that we hadn't deciphered yet. So before I talk about that collector, I will show you the moss. So this is the specimen itself inside here. You can see the species. It was identified as Thuidium abietina, which is now a synonym of Abietinella abietina. It's described as a small, distinctive pleurocarpus moss with stems that are erect and branches which are spreading, reminiscent of a tiny conifer, which I love that description because that's exactly the first thing I thought when I saw this picture of it, is it looked like a tiny pine tree, like super cute. Interestingly too, the genus Abies is actually the genus of fir trees, like this Abies fraseri, which is the Fraser fir you can see here, the most common Christmas tree. And I'm assuming that that has something to do with the scientific names of this moss, which I thought was kind of a cool connection. And it says the moss likes dry calcareous habitats ranging from sandy to rocky or turfy soil, and it's circumboreal, so it's found kind of all across northern regions. So our collector, L. Savicz, turns out to be Lydia Ivanovna Savicz-Lubitskaya, I believe. And this is her name here in Russian, in Cyrillic, but you can see it has been translated a ton of different ways into the Roman alphabet. So this caused some challenges trying to track down specimens attributed to her because it's been spelled. You can see, I think every part of her name has a number of spellings, her first name, her hyphenated last name. So that made it really tricky, but I was able to look up and find a number of sources, articles and things about her. There was short, very brief articles on English Wikipedia, German Wikipedia, Russian Wikipedia. Again, you can see her name is spelled a variety of different ways. They had some information but they all referenced an article from 1985. There was a memorial article in a Russian journal. And I was able to find, through the power of the internet, this Russian article. But again, it's completely in Cyrillic. I tried copying and pasting it into Google Translate, but the character recognition was not working that well. So I actually ended up holding my phone up to the screen with the Google Translate app. If you have not used it, it's super handy. And I was able to use this app to read this article in English, which is pretty cool. So I was able to actually, again, it had a lot of really interesting information. So I wouldn't have been able to access that without using this, which was super awesome. So, anyway, she was a Soviet bryologist. Super sadly, I could not find any pictures of her, and I was really bummed about that. But again, if one turns up, I will definitely share it to you later. But she was born in 1886 in Dvinsk, which is now the city of Daugavpils in Latvia. But at the time, it was part of the Russian Empire. Her father was a teacher. She says in 1905, she graduated from the Minsk Gymnasium, which is basically high school, with a silver medal. And Minsk is actually further south, and currently it's the capital of the country of Belarus. So after she graduated, she taught for a period of time at a girls' gymnasium and a boys' sixth grade school. But in 1908, she moved to St. Petersburg to continue her own education. And she entered this really interesting, it's called the Higher Courses for Women in St. Petersburg, Russia. And this was the first higher educational institution for women in Russia. And it was founded back in 1878. It was informally called the Savicz courses after its first director. And the school included programs in history, physics, mathematics, and law, and it conferred degrees equivalent to a university degree. And Lydia studied natural sciences there. And these are some really great pictures, actually, from right around the time she was there, a little bit afterwards. You can see a geometry class, a chemistry lab. And like I said, that's what she was studying when she was there. She also worked at the same time as a preparator, it says, for the Kamchatka expedition, and she was working on organizing biological materials. So obviously she was already working with mosses at that time. And I'm not totally clear if that was a contemporary expedition. I wasn't able to kind of track that down, but this expedition was to this peninsula, which is in kind of the far east of Russia. And when I looked it up, there was really two references to a couple expeditions back in the 18th century. And these were commissioned by the Emperor Peter the Great. They sought to explore and map the eastern reaches of Siberia, the Asian Pacific coast. They confirmed the presence of the Bering Strait. They made the European discoveries of Alaska, several islands in that region. And I couldn't confirm if she was working on specimens like left over from those expeditions or like a more recent expeditions in that region. But either way, she was obviously doing kind of hands-on work with Russian mosses by that time. So in 1912, she continued work for the museum, she became an employee of the Imperial Botanical Museum in St. Petersburg. And then in the following year, she continued working there, but also started working at the Botanical Garden, and that she worked with those institutions for basically the rest of her career. In 1931, they merged to become the Botanical Institute of the USSR Academy of Sciences, which you can kind of see on some of the labels up here that reference that institution. And then since 1940, it's been called the Komarov Institute of Botany, which is part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And she was really the first person there to specialize in bryophytes and mosses. So it said historically that there wasn't really anyone who was a specialist. So a lot of the specimens that were collected in Russia would get sent out abroad, and a lot of times they didn't come back. So she was the first person to really be able to keep them there, to identify them in-house, and she was able to really build the first and the largest bryophyte collection in the Soviet Union, which is pretty awesome. And at that time, like I said, the moss flora of Russia was kind of a blank spot. So it hadn't been well studied, was not really much published. And so she set about kind of filling in that gap. So in 1914, she published her first works related to bryophytes and lichens. The following year, she collected mosses near a spa town, which is near the Black and Caspian Seas. She worked with her husband. So this is which is where the last name Savicz comes from. And he was actually a lichenologist who also worked at the Imperial Museum. And they basically did a big survey. They discovered 24 new mosses and 2 new liverworts that they described. And then let me see. Gotta find those. Okay, and then in 1917, the October Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution took place, and it was involved a military takeover of the government in St. Petersburg, where she was living and working, and was a big moment in kind of the larger Russian Revolution that went on for the next several years. But amidst these political changes and turmoil, she traveled widely throughout the Eastern Soviet Union. In 1935, she undertook an expedition to study mosses on several Arctic islands, and she later completed some bryophyte surveys in the countries of Georgia and Azerbaijan. She studied mosses really comprehensively, so she published moss floras for several regions in Russia. She studied their biology, ecology, physiology, and biochemistry. She explored taxonomy and described new species, and also published on agricultural and economic applications of bryophytes. And it does say that she got a doctorate of sciences, and it doesn't mention about her going back to school, so I don't know the specifics of that, but she definitely continued her training. It says one of her groups of interest was the Sphagnopsida, which is a class that includes 4 living genera and 1 fossil genus, this Protosphagnum, which is only known from fossils. And the most commonly known one is sphagnum, which is most well known. It's commonly known as peat moss or bog moss. There's over 380 species that grow across the northern hemisphere and some in some parts of the southern hemisphere. It's notable for its ability to absorb moisture and has been used by humans for a very long time in a range of ways. So Savicz herself was involved in research during World War II with doctors from a hospital in Leningrad on using peat moss to dress war wounds. And moss, apparently, this moss can absorb up to 20 times its weight in liquid, which is twice as much as cotton. And it has some kind of mild antibacterial properties. So it became common practice in hospitals and in the field to use it as a wound dressing. And it was believed to save lives, a lot of lives on all sides during both of the world wars. It was even used in diapers by Native Americans, and was even manufactured into sanitary napkins in the early 20th century, which I thought was super interesting. It even has this great mascot here. So she continued to publish throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, including more floras of regions, more keys, and new taxa. And this is just her bibliography from 1956 onward. She described or revised at least 50 taxonomic names, working in several very large groups, including Bryum, which has over 800 species, and the family Polytrichaceae. She distributed at least 1 exocaudae, which we can see here, and she was she was known as a great collaborator. So this quote said, L.I. Savicz-Lubitskaya was not only a great scientist, but also a remarkable person. Kindness in relations, friendly disposition, and constant concern for people were internal features of her character. All the bryologists who came to Leningrad, both Soviet and foreign, received help and animation from her side. She retired in 1963, but continued to work pretty extensively as a consultant and later a volunteer. She published a handbook of the mosses of the USSR when she was 84 years old. And she published her last scientific work, The Leaf Mosses of East Antarctica, at the age of 90. In 1979, she settled in Pushkin, which is a municipality within St. Petersburg, where she wrote her autobiography. And I could not find that. It's referenced as a manuscript, so I'm not sure if it was actually published, but I think it would be fascinating to read more of her story, if that's ever can be kind of identified somewhere online. And she passed away in 1982 at the age of 96. So when she was alive, she received a number of medals for her work, including the Order of Lenin, the Order of the Red Banner of Labor, the Medal for the Defense of Leningrad, and the Medal for Heroic Work in the Great Patriotic War. 2 moss genera were named after her. So this Lydia Ivanovna, which is now a synonym of Mycobryum, and Savicz-Lubitzkaya, which is now a synonym of Plagothecium. And there was a bryological conference in 1986 that was dedicated to the 100th anniversary of her birth in Russia. So specimen-wise, sadly, there's not really a lot in there. I was kind of surprised. But again, I think some of that is due with the difficulty in transcribing her name, the multiple spellings. I was able to find, again, a little over 300 in the Graphite portal, over close to 600 in the Lichen portal, although a lot of those I think are her husband, and things she collected in concert with her husband. Again, I think there's likely a lot more that are maybe not yet transcribed because of the language, or incorrectly transcribed. Obviously, we had a lot that I corrected that were not spelled properly. And so hopefully more will get added as part of this project. And I can show you just some examples. So this is when I was looking on GVIF, so another website, and these are all different versions of her name that I had to kind of search through to find numbers. And so again, there's just a lot out there, a lot of different ways to spell her name, obviously. So again, I'll end with a couple quotes from her memorial article. This one said, "It is difficult to overestimate the contribution made by LI to the development of Soviet bryology. It covers almost the entire range of issues related to the study of bryophytes, from flora to taxonomy to physiology, biochemistry, and economic use. And LI can and should be called the founder of Soviet bryology. Most bryologists in the country are students of LI or students of her students." So yeah, a really impressive woman of science. I expect more of her work will be made accessible by our project. And yeah, if I'm able to find out any more, I'll share that later. So thank you again for listening.